All right, everybody, welcome to another episode of the Slay at Home Speaker Series. Um, we are joining you tonight from Eagle, Colorado, but I'm seeing a lot of Utah in here this evening, obviously. So let us know what part of Utah you guys are tuning in from this evening right there in the chat feature. Open up your chat and you can let us know where you're tuning in from. Also, if you have questions this evening, you can write them right there in the chat for us. We'll try to do our best to answer any questions, and we will have a Q&A there at the end. But again, thanks for tuning in to the Slay at Home Speaker Series. This is episode 14, and we've got one more next week. You can find all of the episodes at the westonbackcountry.com website on our education page. So check those out. You can also find them on YouTube, and we do release these videos about a week after we film them. So if you want to watch it again, just tune in next week, and you can find it there on our Facebook page or our website or our YouTube channel. So thanks again. I'm seeing Provo, Sugar House, Park City, Salt Lake. Don, thanks for tuning in from Park City, buddy. We're stoked to have you. Everyone else, keep letting us know where you're tuning in from. We'll give people a little bit more time to tune in. And yeah, we'll kind of get started here shortly. So again, thanks everyone for tuning in. We're really happy to connect our community. If you're not familiar with Weston, we make skis, snowboards. We're really known for our split boards. We're based here in Minturn, Colorado, here in the Vail Valley. So we're a company just really focused on community. Backcountry is kind of our bread and butter, and just really love connecting with you all. So again, thanks for tuning in tonight. Our sponsors are the Utah Avalanche Center. Big shout out to the UAC. They are your hub for everything Avalanche education related, from forecasts to observations to accident reports to events. That is really where you want to go to learn all about the Snowpack and Avalanche education there in Utah. Also, Utah Mountain Adventures, great guide company based there in Utah. Definitely check them out. Big shout out to UMA. So tonight, our topic is the state of the Snowpack. We'll also be touching on some other finer points. We'll be doing a demo on the Utah Avalanche Center website. So definitely stay tuned for that. I am Ben. I'm the brand experience manager here at Weston. If you want to get a hold of me, at Ben in the Backcountry on Instagram is one of the easiest ways there. I kind of oversee all of our guided programs, all of our events. I'm also on our design team, so I get to play with some of the split board and solid board designs that we work on here at Weston. And joining us this evening is Cody Hughes. Cody, thanks so much for joining us. You guys got a little flash of Cody earlier, but Cody, thanks so much for being here, buddy. Let the people know, who you are and what you're up to.
Yeah, Ben, thank you. So hey everyone, my name is Cody Hughes. I am originally from Nashville, Tennessee. Funny enough, where there's not much snow or mountains, but I've been in Utah now for 11 years. I started originally getting into the snow and avalanche field as an intern with Utah Avalanche Center when I was in college. So I did 2 internships with the UAC, and now I just continue my work with the UAC. I do talks like this, and then I teach some avalanche education, the Know Before You Go program, and then I help out with some of the awareness events. I work as a lead guide and avalanche forecaster with Utah Mountain Adventures, where I teach avalanche education and then do private like backcountry ski and snowboard guiding here in the Wasatch Mountains, in the central core of the Wasatch. And then I also guide out in the Uinta Mountains, about 45 minutes east of Salt Lake here. And I also work as a avalanche forecaster and snow safety, doing avalanche control work at Park City Powder Cats. So I really just try to keep my head in the snow as much as possible and really keep up with what's going on in the snowpack so that I can provide the best, like high quality skiing and safest skiing for myself, obviously, and for my clients. So yeah, that's me.
Awesome, Cody. Thanks so much for being here. Yeah, and guys, Cody is a great resource, so definitely ask us questions this evening. Again, type those questions down in the chat. Shayna, I hope I'm pronouncing that right. Yes, there will be a recording of this posted. You know, it usually takes us about a week to get it up, so just stay tuned for that. But yeah, if you guys have questions on the snowpack or even terrain, Cody is a great guide and even a mentor that you could book there in Utah, and I highly recommend going out with a guide. He's just a fantastic resource, and all the guides there at UMA would be great resources and mentors for you. So tonight, you know, again, I'm going to briefly touch on Avalanche Education. We'll discuss the different Avalanche problems that you should really know and understand in order to read a forecast and plan a trip. Cody is going to kind of get into detail with the state of the snowpack. And then he's also going to give a UAC website demo that will kind of cover how to check the forecast for each of the different zones that they put out, how to, you know, go in and read the different observations, how to even read the accident reports, and then even how to find local education resources. And there's some event stuff there. They even got a sweet shop that you can check out to support them. And then we'll kind of briefly touch on some trip planning resources as well. And then we'll have a time for a Q&A. So feel free again to drop us questions down in the chat, or feel free to save them till the end if you have something specific you want to ask Cody. So, you know, why take Avalanche Education in the first place, right? A lot of great reasons. You know, you'll learn to recognize avalanche terrain, which is very helpful if you're traveling in it, right? You'll learn how to read the avalanche forecast. You'll learn how to study the snowpack to really look for things like weak layers that might set off avalanches. You'll learn companion rescue, right? Which is one of the most important things. If you're going to be out with partners, you need to know how to rescue them if there is an avalanche. And then you might even meet great backcountry partners in those courses and mentors, like I just mentioned, right? So UMA offers a variety of different courses. You can check them out at that website right there. And then this is the basic structure for Avalanche Education, right? So it might start with a free Avalanche Awareness class, and then you might proceed to an Avalanche Rescue course and a level 1, and then you might even head on down that track to a level 2. You can also see the professional track over here. That's really more for people like Cody that are becoming guides or working professionally in the avalanche industry. Most of us are really going to be over here on this recreational track. So again, let us know if you have any questions about that kind of stuff as well. And then, you know, Avalanche Awareness. So again, this is, you know, a class most people offer for free. There's usually hundreds of these throughout the state. This season, Know Before You Go has gone online. So I highly recommend checking it out on the UAC website. You can also find it on the Colorado Avalanche Information Center website. It was kind of a group effort there, but it's all online now. So you can go to knowbeforeyougo.org/learn and take actually a series of modules to do your Avalanche Education or your Avalanche Awareness free and you know, on your couch, just like the Slay at Home series. So definitely try that out if you're not familiar with it. An Avalanche Rescue, you know, that's just how you learn to use your beacon, shovel, and probe, right? You're going to learn how to make a rescue and learn how to use those essentials. And then a level 1 is again, it's for anyone that's looking to travel in avalanche terrain and you know, really make good decisions while they're out there. It'll teach you how to manage your risk and learn from your experiences in the backcountry. So that's kind of the baseline that we really recommend for someone who's going to be in avalanche terrain or getting into backcountry skiing or split boarding. You know, all my partners, everyone I go out with has, you know, baseline a level 1. So that's really what we recommend. And then there's, you know, these are all the great providers that you can reach out to take a level 1 or even an intro to backcountry or an intro to splitboarding day. You could also even book a mentorship day. If you've already taken a level 1, it's really good just to get out with a guide to go explore new terrain, right? You're going to learn more from one day with a guide about a new area than you ever could, you know, scrolling through things online. So really recommend all of these great companies if you're trying to look for a level 1 or an intro course. And you can find all this stuff on the Utah Avalanche Center website again. And then I'll kind of kick it over to Cody here to tell you a little bit about, you know, who the UAC is, what they do, all the great resources they offer. So Cody, buddy, feel free to take it away. Perfect.
1 second. Yeah, perfect. So the quick chats, pull up those chats. Oh my gosh, I want to turn that off. So trying to pull up the chats here. So question Q&A. That's not the Q&A. Sorry.
You're good. I'll field you some questions there in the chat. Feel free to just tell us who the UAC is, and I'll field you some questions as we go.
Perfect. Yeah, and all those questions I'll make sure and hit on. Hey, so the Utah Avalanche Center, right? They've been providing avalanche forecasting here in the state of Utah for 7 different regions throughout the state for over 40 years now. I think this is their 41st or 42nd year of doing so. The Utah Avalanche Center came up with the Know Before You Go program roughly 20 years ago now, when I think actually it was like 15 years ago. But basically, that is a free Avalanche Awareness program that is taught to kids and adults alike, and it's like the basis of Avalanche education. And it was brought about after a really gnarly accident here in Utah. And the idea is that, like, hey, we live in and around the mountains in the Intermountain West. So whether we like ski, snowboard, snowshoe, we need to have some idea of how avalanches work. Just like folks that grow up next to the oceans, they learn about riptides and shore breaks from a young age. We grow up around the mountains and we need to have some idea of how avalanches work. So that program is taught internationally now in like 7 different languages, and UAC came up with that program. Avalanche education here in the state of Utah is expanding every single year, more and more people in the backcountry. We have 2/3 of our funding comes from donors. Only 1/3 of our funding actually comes from the Forest Service. So we have a really great community, backcountry skiing community, that supports avalanche forecasting and education here in Utah. And we couldn't do it without the work of like people like yourselves that help support this incredible program. And then every year we do the Utah Snow and Avalanche Workshop, where we kind of a meeting of the minds, where everyone gets together within the community, professionals and recreationalists alike, and they talk about season accidents from the year before, and then they talk about the state of the snowpack, and then some research that's coming out in our field. Because again, we're like, no matter how much we learn about snow and avalanches, and no matter how much experience or wisdom that we gain in the mountains, no one is ever an expert. And I think that's really important to remember throughout our backcountry skiing career, is that we're always students to the mountains and we're always trying to learn. So the state of the snowpack. So what I'd like to do is really talk about how we started our season, how we've kind of gone about December and January and mid-February, and where we are now and where we're going to go. So this photo here was taken just a couple days ago on a beautiful morning at sunrise on some of the south-facing terrain in Little Cottonwood Canyon, and it was one of the better days of my year. It was beautiful being up there with 4 friends of mine. So what we first have to understand is, like, the most important thing that you can take out of an avalanche class is understanding what type of avalanche that you're dealing with. When you take an avalanche course, you're going to get like bombarded with a ton of information, and it's going to seem very overwhelming. But me as an avalanche educator, I want to take this overwhelming subject, and I want to make it simple, right? I want to give you the tools necessary to stay safe in the mountains and recognize the big mistakes that you can't make, because you're never going to eliminate risk and you're always going to make mistakes in the mountains. And understanding the small mistakes that maybe result in like oh no, that was kind of spooky, or a close call, but the big mistakes that result in fatalities and the big mistakes that result in really bad accidents is really boils down to understanding simply like what type of avalanche that you're dealing with. So here in Utah, we've broken down our avalanche problems into like 8 different problems, right? And so the new snow problem is broken down into like loose dry avalanches, also known as sloughs, which we trigger inbounds, right? And that's when you just get a lot of low density snow that falls out of the sky, and you ski across a steep slope and it starts at a point and it V's out, right? That's a type of avalanche that's predictable and ultimately manageable because it goes at your feet. Also, underneath the new snow problem is like our storm slabs, right? So underneath our storm slabs, we have more higher density snow that oftentimes results in propagation. But our new snow problems and our wind drifted snow, they're predictable avalanche problems, right? The wind blows, it snows a bunch. We can see these in the snowpack and we understand what we're dealing with when we go out there. The one type of avalanche problem we've been dealing with this year that just doesn't seem to go away and it has been plaguing us is the persistent weak layer. We had a weak layer that formed under cold nights and clear days for a month from the middle of November until the middle of December. For an entire month, that snow just sat there and got more and more weak and sugary, which we're going to talk about in the state of the snowpack. And then we put some snow on top of it. And unfortunately, that snow didn't actually start to gain strength until like January 23rd. You got to add a lot of snow on top of that to allow that layer to start to gain strength. And that layer, unfortunately, has been plaguing us all year long. The wet snow problem, right? Loose, wet avalanches, the sun comes out, it heats up the snow on the south facing aspects and it starts to like shed, right? And as we move further into spring and we go multiple nights without a solid refreeze, right? So days and nights without a solid refreeze, we can see really large wet slab avalanches. And you'll learn more about this in your avalanche class. Glide avalanches, cornices, and then our normal caution. Normal caution is basically, right, like we might not be dealing with a lot of avalanche problems in the mountains that day. However, it's still up to us to pay attention to the changing weather conditions in the mountains. We always have cornices. It can start snowing earlier than expected. The wind can pick up and start drifting snow. The basis of these avalanche problems is to give us like an idea of what is going on in the mountains and what to expect before we go out there. But when we step into the mountains, it's our job to be our own avalanche forecaster and to recognize the change in conditions that can spike the instability of the snowpack, right? So what is a persistent weak layer, right? So it's a weak layer in the snow that forms under a certain weather conditions, right? So during the early season, November, December, January, early February, when we go multiple days and nights without getting snow, so we're under that high pressure weather pattern, and it's cold temperatures, we have large fluctuations of temperatures during the day, the snowpack is losing a lot of heat. And so what happens is that the snow surface starts to weaken and it starts to get weak and sugary. And the longer that it goes without adding snow on top of it, so the longer that we go without getting a storm, the weaker that snow becomes. And then when we add the slab on top of it, that weak layer becomes persistent, right? And so these persistent weak layers, they're called persistent for a reason, and they take a lot of time to strengthen, right? And now you don't have to be a snow scientist to dig down in the snowpack and look for these persistent weak layers and actually see them. You can just dig down and see them with the naked eye. But you also don't have to be a snow scientist to learn how to avoid them. The key with the persistent weak layer is just avoiding them. And that is simply checking the avalanche forecast every day. And when you see persistent weak layer in the forecast, guys, the golden rule in the mountains, no matter how much avalanche education you take, no matter how much experience or wisdom or how many years you have out there is no outsmarting this type of avalanche problem, right? So it's not like, oh, when you take a Pro 1, I'll teach you how to manage this persistent weak layer. Ski cuts, cornice drops, explosives can't even sometimes fool the persistent weak layer, right? So for us, it's like the key is like, let it go out of the forecast, let us bury it deep, let it strengthen. And when it goes out of the forecast, then we can start to step into that terrain. But when it's there, the key is actually just avoiding it altogether. I personally have not skied any slope over 30 degrees on like west through southeast facing above 8,000 feet all year long, right? So the key is avoidance. It's been a tough year. But remember, terrain is always the answer. I've skied powder every single day, and I've had clients super psyched, and we've just kept our slope angle below 30 degrees, which has been great. The North American Avalanche Danger Scale, I like to think about this sometimes as a stoplight. When we have higher extreme danger, the danger is so in your face, right? That it's like red light conditions. If we bump down to green light with like low and moderate, maybe that's the time that we can start to step out into like, bigger, higher consequence terrain, unless we are dealing with persistent weak layer, right? And then even if it's moderate for persistent weak layer, we have got to avoid that problem. But this considerable zone is where 47% of avalanche fatalities happen. And considerable is a really funny word, and it's a tricky word, and I think it tends to trick a lot of people. But just recognize, under the likelihood of avalanches here, natural avalanches are possible and human triggered avalanches are likely underneath considerable. And I'll say that again, human triggered avalanches are likely. If you step into terrain with considerable hazard, you are likely to find an avalanche, right? So it's kind of like a yellow light, where here in Utah, we have a lot of stoplights down here in the Salt Lake Valley. And when people come up to yellow lights, instead of hitting the brakes, they tend to hit the gas, right? We need to take this considerable zone and we need to take a step back and we need to really hit the brakes. We need to understand what type of avalanche that we're dealing with. And we need to most likely, under considerable, probably avoid that terrain. And recognize, even if you're dealing with new snow and wind, and you step into terrain with considerable avalanche hazard, you're likely to find an avalanche. And if you don't truly understand avalanches and have spent a lot of time around them, the key is avoidance, right? And it's the same way with like the persistent weak layer. Like moderate danger does not give me like today. It's moderate danger for persistent weak layer. I was guiding today. I skied all slopes without the persistent weak layer. We had great snow on south facing terrain. We avoided the persistent weak layer, right? So just read through the likelihood, right? Understand the North American avalanche danger scale and understand what type of avalanche that you're dealing with when you step into the mountains. When you scroll down into the avalanche forecast, here in Utah, we're very lucky to have this danger rose that actually gives us elevations. So that outer ring is 8,000 feet and below. That middle ring is 8,000 to 9,500 feet. And the top ring is 9,500 feet and above. So it's like a 3D image, as if you were like in a plane looking down on a mountain. When you dig down into the avalanche forecast and you scroll down and you look at the different avalanche problems, this is oftentimes what you're going to see. And it's going to tell you what aspects, what elevations you're dealing with this avalanche problem. So when I first started skiing in the backcountry as a recreationalist, way before I was a guide or into snow safety, I would write this stuff down. And especially when it came to the persistent weak layer, if I saw a persistent weak layer over here in the avalanche problem, I would write it down, what aspects, what elevation that it exists, and then I would avoid that terrain altogether. And what I mean by that is I would like red light that terrain. So I would look at my partners and go, okay, guys or gals, no matter what happens today, and what I mean by that is no matter how good it looks, no matter how many people are doing it, no matter if the sun is shining, we are going to red light or there's tracks on a slope. We're red lighting this terrain. We are not going to ski slopes or this persistent weak layer. Recognize that about 80% of avalanche fatalities happen with a persistent weak layer. So, you want to like pull the tail of that type of avalanche dragon, you're going to find yourself in trouble, right? And the key is avoidance. The key is avoidance. So our snowpack here in Utah. So around November, like 11th, 12th, we started to add a snowpack to our mountains here in the Wasatch. We received about 2.5 feet of snow. And that lasted from like November 12th or so until about November 17th. We stayed in an active weather pattern. We went about an entire month without putting snow on top of that. So we went high and dry. When we get early season snow in the Intermountain West, Colorado, Utah, really anywhere, all of the people in the snow industry, in the snow safety industry, are all like shaking their heads like, oh no, please just keep snowing. Please keep snowing. But as we all know, we have a couple weeks or 3 weeks or 4 weeks left of fall. And we oftentimes go into that like high pressure. So what happened was over that entire month, we had all the snow on the south facing terrain, it melted away. So great, right? We have no old snow. But on the north facing side of the compass, that's where the snow held on. And when you're beginning, people like to say, and I like to ask this question, I'm like, so what happened to the snow on the north? And people go, oh, well, it got crusty and hard. It's the opposite. It doesn't see any sunshine in November, December, early or January, or actually first week of February, because the sun angle is so low in the sky that it's not shining on those aspects. So it doesn't get crusty and hard. It gets weak and sugary, and it becomes faceted snow grains. The longer that we go without adding snow on top to insulate those weak layers and to allow them to start like gaining strength, the weaker that snow becomes. So basically, while we're dealing with such a sketchy snowpack here in Utah right now, it's because we went an entire month, guys, without like getting any snow. So that weak layer got weaker and more weak and more weak and more weak, right? And it developed into some depth hoar snow grains, some really large, cupped, like striated snow crystals that it's really hard to come back from that. So we look at Friday, December the 11th, we have low avalanche danger. And as we move throughout the week and we start to add snow to the top of our snowpack, 18 to 24 inches, we've got a weak layer on the north, right? And you can see that here on the elevation and aspect rows. We've got a weak layer on the north half of the compass, and all of a sudden, we've started to add that slab, right? So you need 4 necessary ingredients to get an avalanche. You got to have a weak layer. You got to have a slab. You got to have a slope angle steeper than 30 degrees. And then you got to have a trigger. And whether that trigger is from the wind, like naturally from the wind or more snow, or whether it's artificial from a skier, right? So we start to add that slab. So on December 12th, if we look back to December 12th here, we have moderate avalanche danger. We get a lot of low density snow with not much wind. So we get these long running, dry, loose avalanches, but people are skiing in avalanche terrain because we don't have the slab. We didn't have the wind, and we just got a bunch of low density snow sitting on top of a weak, sugary, faceted snowpack, right? What do we need to get avalanches? We need a slab. We need more wind or more new snow. As we roll into December 13th, the winds start to pick up out of the southwest. And these winds are averaging 30 miles an hour. And this is actually what is starting to add that cohesive piece of snow on top, right? That slab. So we actually start to see human triggered avalanches for the first time of the year around like December 13th. We now have the weak layer. And since the wind has been blowing and we have the new snow, we actually have the slab on top. December 16th, reported reports are coming into the UAC of cracking and collapsing. Very low stability scores, right? So we're doing these like compression tests and these extended column tests, and we have this slab sitting on top of this weak layer. And it's like, we put a couple of taps from our wrist, just a little bit of weight, and all of it is propagating across, right? On December 17th, we get more wind and we get nearly an inch of water. And so as snow people, guys, we need to start thinking about snow as inches of water and not so much inches of snow. And an inch of water is about 12 inches of snow here in the state of Utah. So we average 1 inch of water for 12 inches of snow, right? So 5 human triggered avalanches are reported to the UAC. Now we've got the slab, we got the weak layer, and the problem is that everybody has gone 6 months without skiing. And all of a sudden there's snow and everybody wants to go skiing. And so everybody starts stepping into like bigger terrain, like way before the snowpack in the mountains are ready for them. So here's some photos of the avalanches that are triggered, right? They're very shallow slabs of snow, but they're quite connected, right? They're failing at the ground on this persistent weak layer. As we roll into December 18th, a summary here of December 18th. Through the week, we had about 2 inches of water to our snowpack, right? So now we're adding more of a slab on top of this weak, sugary snow. And people are like, oh, well, when is this snow going to strengthen? It takes so much more snow than just 24 inches or 36 inches. We need to put like a couple meters on top of this snowpack for it to actually start strengthening. So UAC issues like a high avalanche danger on December 18th, and that persists almost through the entire week, where human triggered avalanches are very likely or likely, right? And the theme of this talk is the faceted snow grains. What you're going to notice through this talk is that we continue to talk about these persistent grains at the ground, right? So on the 18th, the UAC forecasts a high avalanche danger and issues a nearly statewide avalanche warning from the Manti skyline in central Utah all the way up north. This storm came in on the 17th, and the winds picked up. We have snow totals picking up. And remember, the mountains are going through a rapid change. The mountains are a lot like people, and they don't like rapid change. So when we start adding a lot of snow and a lot of wind to our snowpack, especially laying on a weak faceted surface that was underneath, we're going to see avalanches, right? So on December 22nd, we get these strong winds ahead of a cold front that enters the region like midday. At the mid elevations, 30 to 40 at 11,000 feet, we get gusts over 90 miles an hour. It was pretty warm around that time. We had overnight lows that stayed above freezing, and then temperatures dropped to zero around sundown, right? So we just get a lot of wind, which is that rapid change. And we start to see avalanches failing in that weak, sugary, faceted snow. Right around Christmas, pretty interesting. So if you can see my cursor here, a helicopter landed on the top of this peak, and they were going to go do some observations for the Wasatch Powderbird guides to like start opening up their operations for the year. When the helicopter landed here, it remoted this massive avalanche over to the right in Banana Days, which is in Days Fork in Big Cottonwood Canyon. And what's so wild about this event is as this avalanche started moving down the slope, it sympathetically released these two avalanches over here. Crazy, right? That's how weak our snowpack is, right? And just remember that it's all connected, right? You have the slab and you have the weak layer across this entire two drainages, right? And so as this avalanche starts moving down the slope, moving tons of snow, it propagates all the way over this ridge and sympathetically releases these two avalanches. Talk about a spooky setup, right? Like this is like bullseye information that the mountains are quite moody. As we roll into Christmas, the summary of December 25th through the 31st, we get small amounts of new snow and periods of strong winds. Several avalanches are reported to the UAC, all failing on the persistent weak layer of snow that is now buried 12 to 18 inches underneath the snow. Many of these slides were retriggered from a distance, right, remotely, indicating that the sensitivity of our snowpack is very cranky. When we're triggering avalanches from a distance or remotely, it's quite full on in the mountains, right? And so walking around out there, you want to be quite on it with your terrain travel. On the 25th, we get this avalanche that's failing, all the way to the ground, 60 feet wide, 14 inches deep, again, failing on weak faceted snow. And I think a theme that we need to continue to look at through this is that Park City Ridgeline, 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 Fatality, Park City Ridgeline. We don't get as much snow. I noticed that in the chat, a lot of you folks are from Park City. Recognize that it's a tale of two different snowpacks this year, and it is most year. The Park City Ridgeline, unfortunately, and I'm sorry to you all, but you don't get as much snow as the upper Cottonwoods. And therefore, you have a thinner snowpack. Thinner snowpacks always equal weaker snowpacks, especially on a year like this. Deeper snowpacks always equal stronger snowpacks. So yes, your mountains are smaller than the Cottonwoods, upper big, upper little, but unfortunately, you don't receive as much snow on the Park City Ridgeline, and therefore that makes it a more thin, sketchy snowpack over on the Park City Ridgeline, right? So on the 27th, we have this like pretty close call here in the Wilson Glade of Big Cottonwood Canyon. And that's where we're going to actually see the site of a fatality later on in the year, of a 4-person fatality. And yeah, failing 18 inches deep, 50 feet wide. Look, right along the Park City Ridgeline. The Wilson Glade is along the Park City Ridgeline. As we roll into January 1st in the new year, we start to kind of move into moderate danger. So what happens is, as we stop adding snow or wind to our snowpack, the snowpack is pretty resilient. It starts to adjust to all the new snow on top of it. But recognize that the possibility of triggering these avalanches decreases. However, the consequences remain the same. And it's the same setup that we're in right now. With persistent weak layers, it doesn't matter if you trigger the avalanche in high avalanche danger or if you trigger it in moderate avalanche danger. It's going to be the same depth, it's going to be the same width, and it's going to be the same consequences. And that is why the key is avoidance with these persistent weak layers. The UAC does a great job of mapping down in this bottom photo of like the heat map of, okay, where's all the human and natural avalanches failing? And we can see northwest through southeast facing. That is where our problem is existing. And that is where the old snow is living. This is a pretty interesting avalanche. My good buddy, Mark White, he's a very, very savvy snow person. And what he started to think is, well, we've gone like, 5 or 6, 7 days without getting new snow. We've only got like 12 to 18 inches of snow on top of this weak layer, and it's all faceted out. So the slab has faceted because it's gone through 5 or 6 nights without getting with cold temperatures and clear skies. And so there's no slab, right? So he's over here in the photo skiing this track, and on his 3rd track down, playing that game of going, oh, there's no slab, there's no slab, there's no slab. Just remember, there's no slab until there is a slab, right? And Mark found himself in kind of a close call, right? He triggered this avalanche on his skier's left, and luckily he was able to ski out of it. But you just don't want to start playing that game of like betting your life and rolling the dice on, well, there's no slab. Again, there's no slab until there is one, right? And so the key is just avoiding that terrain. And what I mean by that is don't try to outsmart the problem, right? Don't let our egos get involved. Don't be like, oh, I know snow so well, there's no slab here, we're good to go. Just avoid it. Just avoid it, because there's no outsmarting the persistent weak layer problem. On January 4th, down here in the X, we have this snowboarder who dropped off this peak again on the Park City Ridgeline, Sound of Music, on an east aspect at 9,200 feet. And as he skied down, he skied the slope without consequence. But he got in these trees, and I don't know why he did it, but he took his snowboard off. And as soon as he put his foot down into the snow and penetrated through that slab, he collapsed the slope above him and brought this avalanche down. And that resulted in a close call. Now, what I want you to look back on, right, is close call, close call, close call, close call on January 6th, right? And then we roll into Friday, January 8th, and then boom, fatality. So when you're looking at the UAC website, when I show you how to like roll through it, recognize this stuff. When I talk to these forecasters that have spent a lot of time in the mountains and the Wasatch, that's what they oftentimes say. Is it's unfortunately, it's almost like clockwork. They can see like close call, close call, close call, boom, fatality. And then same thing, close call, boom, fatality, right? So on January, I think this was January 8th, we had the first fatality of the year just outside of the canyons in Dutchess Draw, which is unfortunately, we've had a lot of fatalities in Dutchess Draw. It's really easy to take that 9990 lift up, walk right out of that gate, see fresh powder, and go out there and ski it. Right? And so it's really easy for us to make decisions based on emotion in the mountains. And the problem is that making decisions based on emotion in life is generally irrational decisions, and oftentimes doesn't lead to the best outcome. And it's the same way in the mountains. We need to be making decisions based objectively in the mountains. And unfortunately, fresh powder in sunshine can really make the most educated of people make some bad decisions, right? And so that's the unfortunate reality of what we do. So on January 11th, again, the theme going on in Silver Fork, we have another avalanche failing on this persistent weak layer. So, and this is like, 12 to 15 inches deep, running over 1,000 vertical feet. But the theme sort of continues with this persistent weak layer. Now, here's where things get a little bit tricky. Okay, so we roll through Friday, January 15th, all the way through Thursday of January 21st, and notice the avalanche danger goes down to moderate, right? Natural avalanches are unlikely, and human-triggered avalanches are possible. We don't really have any avalanche. Only one backcountry avalanche is reported over the week. Just a couple small storms, 2 to 5 inches are reported throughout the whole week. So we do have that strong wind event on Sunday and Monday, right? So remember, wind's going to find snow, it's going to transport snow, but we just aren't getting the load. The snowpack is sort of sitting there being like, hey, yo, I'm comfortable in my own skin, And I'll tell you, walking around in the mountains, being out there every single day, this was the time period. And even I'll say like throughout the whole entire season up until January 21st, I was watching people get away with a lot of bad decisions in the mountains. And it was because we didn't have the load. We didn't have that big, firm, stiff slab. We only had 12, 18 inches, 24 inches in spots, and we didn't have the continuity of the slab, right? And so there wasn't much of a slab in places, and people were just out there skiing whatever they wanted to. And I'll tell you, the mountains sort of start to come alive. Around the 23rd of January, it's all over. All bets are off. This week, we had 2.2 inches of water in the Cottonwoods, about 2.1 inches of snow water equivalent on the Park City Ridgeline. And now the mountains have that meter of snow, right? So when you start to add a meter of snow on top of a persistent weak layer, and it becomes like a very stiff slab, that's when it's over. That's when you start to get large, connected, high continuity, large propagating avalanches. And that's when like the mountains, I'll tell you, they had enough. That's when they came to life. That's when they were like, all right, everybody, you've been getting away with skiing this strong snow over weak snow because there hasn't been much of a slab. But now, if you start to mess with me, I'm really going to rear my head. So we get like January 23rd, we start to add that snow, we get natural avalanches, and we start to see human triggered avalanches. People are having close calls. People are triggering slides remotely. Again, look how deep this avalanche is failing, about a meter deep, right? We have a close call on Square Top. We have a close call on Two Dogs. And then rolling into January 29th through the February 4th. We add more snow to our snowpack. The snowpack is still like touchy, it's still dangerous. The weak layer is like slowly starting to gain strength. It actually, guys, isn't until January 23rd when we add this 2.2 inches of water until those weak layers at the ground actually start to gain strength. Right? Because up until then, we have not added enough snow on top of those weak layers to insulate them, to keep the warmth in the snowpack, to remove that temperature gradient so that the snowpack can go through a centering and rounding process, right? And that's digging a little bit deeper into snowpack metamorphism, but that's the way it works. Snow gets weak by one way, and that is temperature gradient metamorphism. And snow gets strong by one way, and that is temperature gradient metamorphism, right? And so it's not until January 23rd that we actually allow these weak layers to start to round and center. But that process is very, very slow. So on January 30th, we had 27 avalanches reported from the backcountry in the Salt Lake Mountains, with 2 close calls and near misses. And then, unfortunately, we had the fatality. And that was on Square Top, right? So that was our second avalanche fatality of the year. Awful deal there. And then we also, those 2 close calls and near misses were from like very experienced backcountry users. And everybody, that was on like 31 degree slopes. Right? All avalanches happen between 30 and 45 degrees, but our mountains were so touchy, and that weak layer was so weak, and you didn't have like a very deep slab to like really like allow you to stay on top. Anytime you stepped on a slope that was like 31 degrees, 32 degrees, you were finding avalanches. And this was the highest reported human triggered avalanches in history in a single day at the UAC, right? Things were going off. So we had the avalanche on Main Gobblers where 2 people took a ride. One person was like mid slope. I'm not sure what they were doing, but they were mid slope, like waiting on their friend to ski down, and their friend skied down on top of them, triggered an avalanche, and they both took a really long ride. We had, rolling into February 2nd, we had a avalanche that was triggered from 80 feet away. That was 3 feet deep and 400 feet wide on the Chicken Shit Ridge there in Days Fork. And then we roll into February 5th through the 11th. And this is where we had our bad avalanche fatality in the Wilson Glades. This was a awful deal. Unfortunately, involving really close friends of mine. So this really hits home for me. I was part of the accident investigation with this accident, and it was a really crummy deal. It was unfortunately like a perfect storm scenario, right? But this is along the Park City Ridgeline, again, where the snowpack is more weak and more thin. We have about 1 meter of snow sitting on top of depth floor. So very weak, sugary, faceted snow grains or overdeveloped faceted snow grains. A friend of mine, actually, Dan Nix, took this photo right before the avalanche happened. And this is a photo of their tracks. And I just want everybody to see, like, when I look at this photo and I look at that slope, it looks like a very, very mellow slope. And then when I went and shot some slope angles there, you sort of see the actual slope angles of that slope and the rolls on that slope. And, you know, when you ski in right here where my cursor is, the slope does look very benign. It looks very, very low angle. But unfortunately, it's right on that 31 degree boundary. And this was a very, very sad accident that I think the entire community is still recovering from. That's the nature of our snowpack this year, especially along the Park City Ridgeline, is that it doesn't take much of a slope angle above 30 degrees to find these like big, well-connected avalanches. And I think we're still dealing with that avalanche problem along the Park City Ridgeline. Along February 7th, after the avalanche fatality, clear skies and the gusty winds sort of continue. There's natural avalanches occurring still along the Park City Ridgeline in the West Monitor Bowl, and we roll into February 12th. This week, from the 12th to the 18th of February, is when we had that massive water event, where we got 4 to 6.65 inches of snow water equivalent at 60 to 80 inches of snow. Like the resorts up in Little Cottonwood Canyon, they were, interlodged, not even able to leave their resort or their hotel for 60 hours, right? Everybody was stuck in there, and everybody down here in the valley was like, oh man, it'd be great to be up there. And people were very, very bummed. They were stuck in the hotel. They were running out of food, and it was not a fun time up in Little Cottonwood Canyon. And those avalanche workers were very, very long, sleepless days and nights. But we start to actually get a winter snowpack. Finally, the mountains kind of look white. Around February 12th, at the beginning of the storm, some Avalanche Pass and Big Cottonwood Canyon really start to come alive. It's just, we have a weak, sugary base, and all we needed was a load, right? West Porter Fork and Mill Creek Canyon goes huge. This is again kind of part of the Park City Ridgeline zone. We see these tree snapping, ball breaking, large connected avalanches as we start to add water and wind to the top of our snowpack. I mean, breaking like 200 and 300-year-old trees, Avalanche Pass that were never there before being created. Things start to really come unglued. Around February 17th, for the first time in like 25 years, the Avalanche Danger roads is all black, right? So it's like extreme avalanche danger everywhere in the mountains. I didn't go into the mountains. That was for me a day where I just like took a step back. I looked at this and it was like, man, if I even go up there, it's going to be so deep on 20-degree slopes that I'm not even going to be able to move. So I took the time to catch up with family and hang out down here in the valley. When the storm finally parted, we see these large connected avalanches all over the place, in the cottonwoods, along the Park City ridgelines, and we really start to see the nature of our snowpack for the year. That weak, sugary, faceted snow grain at the ground, avalanches failing all the way at the ground, and running historical distances, right? So, and that's sort of be expected, right? Like 60 to 80 inches of snow is a true test for the snowpack. And yeah, we sort of saw what our mountains were made of that day. Mount Marshall on February 23rd, we were dealing with a very dangerous snowpack, not only in the Wasatch, but also in the Uinta Mountains. North Tent Mountain, this is a 1.3 miles wide avalanche on the Manti skyline. This is down in central Utah. Utah has been dealing with has been a very tough year for avalanche forecasting, for backcountry skiing, and just mountain travelers alike. We're seeing very large, wide connected avalanches, and it's pretty tough with COVID, especially now since backcountry skiing has become so popular. It's not been a year to, be a beginner and learn the hard way in the mountains, because learning the hard way in the mountains has been really difficult this year. It's easy to make mistakes, right? And some of the mistakes that you can make this year with these persistent weak layers could result in some really bad accidents. Right? So here's that large avalanche on North Tent Mountain. Very, very wide, large. So the Manti skyline just out of Ephraim and Mount Pleasant down in central Utah by far has the most sketchy snowpack right now of Utah. 1.3 miles wide there. Just huge, historic slide. And this is sort of our avalanche forecast for that day. This persistent weak layer kind of plaguing the entire state. So our trip planning and resources. First off, should we answer questions pertaining to the state of the snowpack before I go into this?
Yep, I'll field you a few questions here. So, our first question, I think you kind of answered this one, but from William Robertson, what needs to happen for the Wasatch snowpack to heal that persistent weak layer?
Yeah, well, that's a great question. I think that's a question that we're all asking right now. I think the good news is that we have added all of that water on top, But just remember, as I was talking about in the talk, is that we really didn't start to add enough snow on top of our snowpack for it to start to gain strength until January 23rd. So in reality, it's only been a month. Here's the problem as a forecaster, as a guide, and as an athlete actually in this range. And I, trust me, I love to go ski big, steep avalanche slopes. February 24th, man, is like a time where it's time to get after it. Like in the past, like we don't deal with persistent weak layers here in the Wasatch until end February, like late February. It's the time to like go step out in the big terrain. But it's weird. It's a weird year. And something my mentor and I have been talking about a lot lately is that, you know what, man? The snowpack doesn't know that it's February 24th, you know, but we try to get in our minds that we don't generally deal with this. So really the way that we turn the corner is that we continue to let the snowpack strengthen. We have added enough snow on top to let these weak layers start to strengthen and gain strength. And as far as timing goes, it's probably going to be another couple weeks, potentially a month. And you know what, man? It could be one of those years for me where I just wait till I go to Alaska in April to ski steep lines on north facing slopes. Like it could be one of those years. And that's the unfortunate part about it. Last year, it wasn't that way. We were able to step out into steeper terrain. We weren't dealing with these deeper, persistent weak layers. But this year, man, the problem is that the likelihood right now is low to trigger one of these. But man, if you trigger one of these avalanches, it is going to be so deep and so wide, and ultimately is going to be unsurvivable. So the risk for me is not worth the reward. So my suggestion is to just keep following the avalanche forecast, let that problem go out of the forecast. And I'd say it's another couple weeks, unfortunately. It's just kind of one of those years, man. Start biking. It's been beautiful down here.
Yep. Perfect. So, and when it does heal, like, you're saying it's probably in the spring, but will it heal consistently across most of the faces? And how can people identify which faces that haven't healed? I mean, I guess just checking the forecast and that compass, right?
Yeah. Checking the forecast and checking the Avalanche Danger rows with like the forecasted avalanche problem and like where it exists. And just letting that persistent weak layer go out of the forecast. I think when it does go out of the forecast, it's going to go out of the forecast on all of the aspects. But I do think it's deeper into the springtime in like mid to late March at this point. Yeah.
Yep, perfect. And then we have a question from Ann Finley who says, how much margin would you give to a 30-degree slope concern with persistent weak layer problem, 27 degrees?
Yeah, totally. So just think about what you're connected to above you, right? Like I don't want to ever go out and start trying to thread the needle and asking myself, is it 30? Is it 31? Is it 32? So my avalanche inclinometer, which is like my slope angle measurement tool, is really, other than my avalanche safety equipment, my beacon, probe, and shovel, it's the best tool in my bag because it tells me whether the slope can slide or not. But I got to remember that if I'm skiing 27-degree slopes, but I'm connected above me or adjacent to me to steeper terrain, that if I collapse the weak layer on 27-degree slopes, I can trigger avalanches around me, right? And when you do that, it actually can connect to even lower angle slopes when the snowpack is that touchy.
Yep. Perfect.
So choose like 27-degree slopes without overhead hazard and not connected adjacently or overhead.
Perfect. And then we have a couple questions regarding south-facing slopes. I know we were chatting about that earlier. It says the UAC is forecasting a persistent weak layer on upper elevation south-facing terrain right now. Can you speak to where that came from?
Yeah, just listen to them. Yeah, I think I think that's going to be coming out of the forecast in the next day or two.
Right.
So,
and then it kind of is a very similar question. It says, while now the persistent weak layer forecast in Salt Lake has included all south aspects on upper elevations, what weak layer is this? Is it the one from November?
No, it's like buried much deeper in the snowpack underneath melt freeze crust. So we tend to see this like near surface faceting process occur underneath like melt freeze crust due to temperature gradient metamorphism and a large change in temperature right around like crust, and the crust acting as like a vapor barrier. And so that's their concern, is that the snow on top is acting as like a slab resting on top of that melt freeze crust, and there's potential for it to break underneath that melt freeze crust.
Copy that. And then Jeff is asking, how can you find the persistent weak layer on a specific aspect on the UAC website? And we'll demo that here in a little while.
Yeah, right now, like they're talking about the persistent weak layer of biggest concern is buried at the ground. And the only way to find it is to go, dig on a north facing slope, northeast, northwest, east facing, above 8,000 feet. And you got to dig all the way to the ground to find it. And so the way that we do that is that we look at the forecast, or we follow the snowpack throughout the year. We understand where these persistent weak layers are found, and you can read that in the forecast. So let's say, for example, they're talking about a persistent weak layer being buried 2 to 3 feet underneath the snow. Well, then, on a north facing aspect above 9,000 feet or so, well, go dig around a north facing aspect, north, northwest, northeast. Again, make sure that you're not in avalanche terrain, right? Make sure that you're safe. You're like 20 degrees, 25 degrees slope with no overhead hazard, and dig down 3 feet, 4 feet in the snowpack. And that's when you want to do your stability test on that. But just don't get too caught up in those snow pits, and remember that that's just one data set. So if you don't get results on your weak layer, don't let that lure you into that slope, right? Because there's so much spatial variability in the mountains. And so we want to use the forecast and these hundreds of points of data to make our decisions, and not one data set. So I'll tell you personally, as a recreationalist, as a guide, as a forecaster, I never use one snow pit to make a go decision, a go or no go decision. I only use my snow pits to verify the forecast.
Perfect, thanks. And we got one more here from Edward. Can you speak to the myth of mid-pack strength?
Mid-pack strength, let's see, boom, boom. Maybe you're talking about bridging. You're talking about this concept of bridging, I think, Edward. And so what the concept of bridging, right, is that it's a tricky concept, right? And so guys, I want you to all like really tune into this, okay? So I never personally trust a bridge. Here's the reason, is because we as a backcountry skier or snowboarder or snowshoer, however we recreate in the mountains, we have a really difficult time penetrating the snowpack deeper than a meter. So what people try to say is when you get 1 to 1.5 or 2, even 2 meters of snow on top of a persistent weak layer, people go, oh, well, it's a bridge, meaning that your weight is not going to be able to affect that weak layer. But just remember, it might be 2 feet over here, but it might be only like, or I say 2 meters in the deeper snowpack areas, but on the outlying areas, it might only be 2 feet underneath the snow, right? So just remember, and I'm sure we have some engineers in this group as well, there's a weak point to every bridge. And if you find that weak point and you find that shallower area in the slab, and you're able to connect that or collapse that weak layer in that shallower section, that's when you get full propagation. If people go, that's when you get avalanches that are like 20 feet overhead. But it was triggered from a spot that was only 2 feet deep. But you go out into the deepest portion of the crown and you're literally looking at something that's like triple overhead, right? So there's a weak point to every bridge. And the key is to let it strengthen, let it sit, let it chill, and just avoid that terrain altogether. I think the golden rules in this is just to avoid the persistent weak layer. Don't trust the bridge. Recognize that the guys that have been doing this stuff for 40 years, and that like, look, all those forecasters, don't think that they just go out and like ski like 30-degree terrain all the time. No, they want to ski the steep. They want to ski the deep. They love it, right? That's what we live for. But they know the right time. And the timing right now, unfortunately, in Utah is not now.
Yep. Perfect. All right. That's all the questions we got for right now. I think we can cruise on to some trip planning resources here.
Fabulous. So we got the avalanche forecast, right? So our day starts with the forecast, with the public and professional observations, the weather forecast for the day. We've got our maps, guidebooks, our trip reports, and our online resources. I think the biggest thing with the trip planning resources is just, guys, the more homework that you do, the more time you put in behind the computer screen and sitting at home talking to your partners, the better the outcome is going to be, and the better day that you're going to have in the mountains. When you're checking the forecast, like, what is the weather? How can that weather, affect your travel for the day? Basically asking that question: is the snowpack going to be contributing to instability? Is there going to be rapid change going on? So what's the danger rating? What type of avalanche are you dealing with, right? What are the current conditions? What are the recent reported avalanche activity, right? Like, I'll tell you something, like, avalanches travel in packs, and you don't have to be a snow scientist. And what I mean by that, it doesn't matter whether you know the difference in a facet and a faucet. But as long as you can understand where avalanches are happening and avoid the terrain where avalanches are happening and keep it simple, the fundamentals in the mountains, the fundamentals of avalanche safety is what keeps us alive. The more we learn about snow, the more that can actually get us in trouble, because we start trying to outsmart the avalanche problem, right? So just recognize, like, hey man, if they're talking about avalanches failing on north facing, like 2 feet deep and 100 feet wide, if you choose to go ski an avalanche terrain on north facing slopes, like above 30 degrees, I guarantee you're going to find an avalanche as well, right? Avalanches travel in packs, right? So terrain is really the answer. And what's the recent reported field and weather observations? So finding your forecast. So when we look at the Utah Avalanche Center, we go to avalanche.org, or here in the state of Utah, you can go to utaavalanchecenter.org. Our forecast is here is the Salt Lake region. And here's the avalanche danger in the Salt Lake area mountains today, right? We have a scary moderate avalanche danger. What does that mean? That means that, like, low probability, high consequence for persistent slab avalanches, right? Careful snowpack evaluations, cautious route finding, and conservative decision-making skills are required today. People always come out of these classes that I teach and they say, all right, well, what now? Where do I go skiing? You really want to know where the best snow always is? Low angle, shady aspects, below 30 degrees. I always think back to my reasoning of why I started doing this, especially when I have to do like an accident report, right? And I have to go look at, a friend's accident that is just brings me to my knees. And I ask myself, why am I doing what I'm doing? And it's really just to ski fresh powder. I love skiing fresh powder, and it doesn't have to be the steep and the deep. And I think if we recognize that if we're always trying to go out in the mountains and ski the steep and deep, we're not going to live a long life in the mountains. But if we're able to just go out and work with the mountains and develop this relationship with the mountains, listen to their dangers and adhere to their warning signs, we're going to have a long life out there, and we're going to have a great backcountry skiing career. But if we can just go out and ski below 30 degrees, I've been doing that all year long, because of these persistent weak layers on shady aspects. And I have been skiing an incredible amount of powder every single day. And people have been coming home safe, stoked. And I'll be honest, for me, it's been a very easy year. Everybody goes, oh man, it's been such a hard year. No, it hasn't. Because the problem's simple. It's avoidance. So I wake up every day and I'm like, sweet, I'm not skiing an avalanche terrain again today. I don't have to worry about avalanches. So when I go out with my clients, I can take this whole avalanche possibility and just throw it out the door. And I make it simple. Now all I have to worry about is staying warm, eating food, drinking water, making sure that we get out of the mountain safely. I don't even have to worry about triggering avalanches. It's not until I start to step into avalanche terrain that I have to worry about avalanches, right? And I recognize that the time to get after it and the time to really get after steeper terrain in the mountains is always deeper in the springtime, when the snowpack is more deep and more stable. It's not December, it's not January, it's not early February, because it's thin, it's weak, it's shallow. The time to get after it, it's way later in the springtime. Just ask Ben, he's from Colorado. They don't ski anything over 30 degrees on any aspect until late March, early April. They just don't. It's a continental snowpack. It's thin, it's weak, it's shallow. And that's what we've been dealing with here in Utah this year. We generally deal with a more deeper, stable snowpack, but our snowpack has characteristics that are very similar to Colorado this year. And so we just have to accept that as the recreationalists. So we dig down into the forecast, right? And we see that we have our recent avalanches. It's going to give us our weather and snow. And then we have our avalanche problem. We have the south aspects. We have every aspect at the upper elevations above 9,500 and west through southeast, 8,000 feet to 9,500 feet on west through southeast. And then we can sort of read through this. We look at the likelihood, man, it's unlikely or getting close to like unlikely, but half the size is huge. Recognize moderate danger or persistent weak layer is that low probability, high consequence. As me, and again, me guiding, me backcountry skiing as a recreationalist, I'm just like, well, it's not worth the risk, right? I love what I do in the mountains. I love skiing, but most importantly, at the end of the day, I have a family to come home to. And my life is not worth rolling the dice over like a few powder turns. Because next year it might be totally different. We might be able to step out and ski this terrain, or maybe in 2 weeks in March or later in March or in April, maybe we'll be able to do that. But right now, late February, like I recognize that if I trigger one of these avalanches, I'm probably not going to get to come home to my loved ones. And a couple powder turns, man, is not worth one of these avalanches. Our second avalanche problem is wind drifted snow. That's at all elevations. All aspects above 8,000 feet here, right? So you can sort of read through this. So I think what's most important, guys, is when you check this avalanche forecast, read through the bottom line, but I think take the time. Don't just like wake up late, have had maybe a long night before, and just be like, show up to the trailhead and not have an idea of what's going on. It is our responsibility, not only to yourself, but for your touring partners, to wake up early, have a cup of coffee or a tea or whatever however you go about your morning routine. But take your time and read through this forecast. The most obvious sign of avalanches is avalanches. Write down where they're happening, where do they exist, and then avoid that terrain. And then when you dig down into this persistent weak layer, like for me, when I was a beginner, I would have wrote down, okay, persistent weak layer, west through southeast, 8,000 feet to 9,500, and then all aspects above 9,500. When I showed up to the trailhead and I had a morning meeting with my partners, and I didn't just like get out of the car and be like, all right, guys, let's rage. It's like, hey, let's take a step back. Let's have a conversation. Let's talk about what we're trying to achieve today. Let's talk about what terrain that we're going to red light. What are we going to avoid altogether? Okay, now let's do a beacon check. And now let's go into the mountains. Run through a checklist. Don't just step out there and go, right? And I would have said to my partners, this is the terrain today that we're going to avoid, right? And that's how you do it in the beginning, because when you get out there, it can be very overwhelming. You got people skiing above you. You got a bunch of people in the trailhead. You got bombs going off over at Alta or Snowbird, and there's a lot going on. But when you can pull out your little cheat sheet out of your pocket or your Airy book, and you've got it all wrote down, and you scroll to your page for the day, and you go, okay, I've got my plan written down, and I can have this conversation, and I can keep referring back to this throughout the day. So take the time and get the forecast. I think it's really important. With the observations and avalanches, just to roll through a couple things with the UAC website. I think the avalanche list, Ed LaChapelle and Monty Atwater, they started studying snow in the 1930s before World War II up at Alta. The first snow science school was actually at Alta, formed in 1937 by Monty Atwater. And simply put, when they would show up to an area to do the Olympics, like in Squaw Valley, way back when, they would simply show up and they would say, okay, what are the avalanches doing? And this is this avalanche list. So I click on my region, Salt Lake, and this pulls up, what are the avalanches doing out there? Well, we got 4 foot deep avalanches, right? We've got another 4 foot deep, 18 inches deep, When was the last time they were triggering? What aspect, what elevation, right? And we can gather so much information about our tour plan before we step into the mountains. And it's the same thing with the observations. I guarantee you, if you scroll down, you can actually scroll down into here and probably find an observation within the last few days of where these avalanches are what's going on in the areas that you're going to be going to, right? But I think if you're going to be a backcountry skier, it's really important that you sort of make this a part of your lifestyle, that you really start digging into these different observations. So here's an observation from Hardesty Meisenheimer and Chris Gamitro. It's really nice to see Chris back into the mountains. And they just have, what's going on? What's the avalanche problem? What was their red flags that they were experiencing? What were the snowpack, the snow characteristics, the weather that they experienced throughout the day, right? Make this a part of your daily routine. If you're going to be a backcountry skier and you actually plan on skiing in avalanche terrain, I think it's really, really important to make it a part of your routine, right? And unfortunately, right, we have our fatalities, and you can scroll down in your fatalities and we can learn a lot from each other's mistakes, right? So we're never throwing stones in a glass house. We're never, hindsight is always 2020. We're all susceptible to making mistakes in the mountains. But if you really want to like dig into these accidents and understand what happened, we never look at them and be like, oh, those people were idiots. Like, we have to take a step back and say, we could have, we're human and we could have made that mistake too. So how can we learn from other people's mistakes?
Yep.
The next,
One thing I want to add real quick, Cody, is submitting observations. Don't, here in Colorado, we just say, don't be afraid to submit observations. You don't have to be a professional, and a picture is worth 1,000 words. If you're out there, if you see avalanches, whether they're natural or triggered by someone, take a photo, write some thoughts down. If you dig a pit, if you find a weak layer, please submit that stuff. All it does is help those forecasters and those people out there. They're huge areas, right? And it's they can't be everywhere at once. And really anything you have to add really helps. And the other thing I would say is just the frequency of checking the forecast. This is something, you want to be checking multiple times a week. And it seems like everyone on here is well aware of that persistent weak layer. And so you can tell, like, it's not the first time they've checked that forecast. And that's something, you want to do frequently, because then it's not a question of what is, the danger today. It's a well-known thing, and where, what to look out for and where to look out for it. Right.
absolutely. Absolutely. A couple more things that I like to use here on the website is that if you're new to the Wasatch, or if you're just like new to backcountry skiing, if you go to the education and resources and tutorials, it pulls up this screen here, and you have a couple different tabs. The selected touring routes are really, really nice because it rates the terrain, and you can scroll down. We're not going to read through this all together, but you can scroll down and look at the terrain ratings, and it gives you these different routes. Green being the most mellow, yellow getting a little more into avalanche terrain or challenging terrain, orange, and then red starting to step into more from simple to challenging to more complex terrain. And then read through that, and then you can actually scroll down and see the details of these different routes and their rating. The UAC has done a great job with this. And like, say, here's a green rating, USA Bowl route finding. I'm new to the backcountry. I want to go ski USA Bowl. I want to go, on a simple tour. I click on the details. It gives me a description of the route. And then in the green line here, right, I could take a screenshot of this and maybe download it to my phone, and I can actually see the skin route that it suggests getting up to USA Bowl. Right. So very, not a lot of avalanche centers have that. So it's a great resource that we have. Going back to resources and tutorials, the selected touring routes are great. The Utah Avalanche Center has come up with this e-learning program. And so it's an online learning module. It is actually like $75,000 program that the friends of the Utah Avalanche Center, we as donators, funded over 2 years. And it's free. And it is like a 2-hour e-learning program, and it keeps you engaged. So you run through, you click on this link here, right? And it actually will, all you got to do is sign up. It doesn't send you emails, but then you watch these videos and then you take these quizzes as you go. And if you fail it, you go back and you retake the quizzes. For me, this is a really great resource to start thinking Avalanche again at the beginning of the season. You know, at the end of May, we hang up the skis, we put the summer wax on, we take the batteries out of our beacons. And then it's not till December when we start thinking about snow and avalanches again. And we're like, might forget some of those fundamentals. I think the Snow Before You Go program is the fundamentals that keeps us alive in the mountains. And running through this at the beginning of every year is a really great online refresher for that. It's awesome, and it's free. So we're super lucky. As far as any more resources and tutorials, how-to videos are great. Where to dig a snow pig, how to stay safe in avalanche terrain, ingredients for a slab avalanche. The Utah Avalanche Center has gone a long way to really like help us make the Utah Avalanche Center website like a one-stop shop for everything avalanche. So if you have a question about terrain or about how to do a snow stability test, deep slab instability, I think you can find within these how-tos really good resources and good information. So awesome. I want to give you all something really quick. If you're in Utah, here's how you get your weather. The snow page, if you're going to the Cottonwood Canyons or even on the Park City Ridgeline, write this down, weather.gov/SLC/snow. This is what we use as forecasters, the Department of Transportation, the snow safety directors. You click on from snow reports, that's where it brings up. You click on weather forecast. This is the forecast for the Cottonwood region, and it's updated every 12 hours. So this is like, if you want to know about weather, you do not want to go to just NOAA.gov and type in like out to Utah. This is what you want, right? So weather.gov/snow/SLC. And I'll make sure I put that in the chat. The last thing I want to show you is that there's not a very good wind station on there. So Mount Baldy in between Alta and Snowbird is what you want to use for winds. So if you just go into Google and type in Mesowest AMB, Alta Mount Baldy, this is what we use for wind data. Mesowest AMB. Let's see, anything else from the forecast? I think that's all. If you're trying to look for a class, the UAC, Ben put that in there. You can find all the avalanche classes from the UAC. Other classes gives the level 1s from all the different, and level 2s from the other providers in the area. It's a great resource for that. If you're doing beacon practice, you have beacon practice sites all along this throughout the state at these different resorts, and you can click on these like, oh, Snowbird has a beacon practice facility, and it's a Snowbird Rescue Training Center, and it shows you where it is in the description. So that's underneath education, beacon practice, to practice with your transceivers. Do we have any questions on that, Ben?
Yeah, any questions specifically on the UAC? Anything like that? Not really. I got some more for the end here, though.
Okay. The Utah Avalanche Center has a free app that is great, that also has the weather links in the app. So if you don't have the Utah Avalanche Center app, it is free. I maybe suggest getting that. Some of the guidebooks here in Utah, Backcountry Skiing Utah by my boss, Tyson Bradley. Backcountry Ski and Snowboard Routes by Jared Hargrave. And then if you're skiing in the Central Wasatch, the Wasatch Backcountry Skiing Map, there's also an app version for that. And I highly recommend that app version. It's like $13. It downloads to your phone, so you have it in airplane mode or when you're offline. It's a really great resource. It's got like 1,400 named runs. on the Wasatch backcountry skiing map, or app, I should say. Some of the digital resources: CalTopo, HillMap, FatMap, Gaia, those things. I think, taking your level 1, they're going to dig a bit more deeper into these digital resources, which we're not going to do tonight. But you can download these maps to your phone, draw out your routes, and just to help you be a little bit more prepared when you step out into the mountains. Planning out your routes is super, super important. And I think we've talked about this a bunch, but just like doing your homework and having an idea. Now, when you get out there, that could change when you're looking at terrain, but just by taking the time to look at a topo and plan out your route can really save you like overhead hazard. I think it's really important to recognize that you're never going to eliminate risk in the mountains, but one way to like really minimize risk is to travel safely on the uphill, and that's going to minimize your exposure to overhead hazard. So by traveling safely in the mountains and using terrain to our advantage, we can really minimize our exposure to risk, but we're never going to, of course, totally eliminate it, right? But a lot of people, like 40% of people that are caught in avalanches are caught on the uphill, right? So remember, we just want to travel safely. I'm really sorry. Okay. So some personal observations when you're in the mountains, like what is the recent avalanches are and activity. If you go out into the mountains and you see an avalanche, what aspect, what elevations are these happening on? And again, even if you don't know, like take a photo and send it to the Utah Avalanche Center. Are you experiencing cracking and collapsing or wumping in the snowpack? Underneath these personal observations right now is what I'm talking about, is the 5 red flags. And what you've heard me talk about is it's the fundamentals that keep us alive in the mountains. Recent avalanches, cracking and collapsing, active wind loading, heavy snowfall, rapid warming. It's not one series of, or it's not one mistake that gets us caught in avalanche accidents. It's a series of mistakes, and it's ignoring warning signs. It's you miss this, you miss that, and you miss this, and all of a sudden, boom, accident. So it's our job to pay attention to these 5 red flags. And I really, truly believe that if you just keep the 5 red flags, what you're seeing on the screen right now in your head, take a screenshot. These are the things that will keep you alive in the mountains. It's not understanding how a snow crystal metamorphoses. It's the simple, basic fundamentals of mountain travel in the winter. And all of this, guys, you can pretty much gather from a website of your local forecast center before you even step foot into the mountains. So you can be like, hey guys, yeah, we got recent avalanches today. I was checking observations, and these observers were like talking about collapsing in the snowpack and like big shooting cracks. And the wind's blowing today, and like it's supposed to snow like 12 inches, but the sun's not coming out. So we have 4 out of the 5 red flags present today. Guess what? We're not skiing avalanche terrain, right? You can start that conversation. These are a couple of the golden rules, and this is what I'm going to leave you with. Look, never ski slopes where persistent weak layers exist. And I know that's broad, but it's the truth. Like, I don't do it. The forecasters don't do it. Ben doesn't do it. Nobody that spent a lot of time in the mountains, we just don't ski slopes where persistent weak layers exist. You got to really understand your aspects and spatial awareness. Guys, take a compass. Take a compass. It's so important because you'll don't ever underestimate how your internal compass could potentially be off a little bit. So understand what aspect you're on, what elevation, and what type of avalanche problem you're dealing with. And lastly, let the snowpack settle and adjust to the new snow above when dealing with those new snow, storm slabs, or loose dry avalanches, or those wind slab avalanches, right? I like to use the analogy that the snow surface is like Elmer's glue, and it doesn't adhere like super glue. So when you add a bunch of new snow or a lot of wind to the snow surface, it takes 48 to 72 hours for that to bond to the old snow surface. And what I mean by that is don't just go out and dive into steep avalanche terrain if you're not dealing with persistent weak layers, right? The day after a storm or 2 days after a storm, let it sit, let it chill, let it adjust, let it adhere to that old snow surface before you start diving into steeper terrain. And so Are you ready here at the end of this, at the talk, right? Beacon, probe, and shovel. Do you have the right gear? Do you understand how to use that gear, right? Like efficiently by taking an avalanche course. Are you stepping into the right terrain that's appropriate for your group? Are you pushing somebody a little bit? Do you need to back off? Remember, keep your expectations low in the mountains, right? Low expectations in life lead to the best days. It's the same way to the mountains. If we get our hopes up, we have high expectations to a day in the mountains. Oh, it's going to be so good. This like line I've wanted to ski for so long. It's powder, blah, blah, blah. You go out there, it never pans out the way you wanted to, right? So just keep your expectations low. What is the forecast for the day? What are the type of avalanche problems that you're dealing with? What's the level of avalanche education do you have? And what do your partners have? Have you planned your trip correctly for your group for the avalanche problems? Do you have bailing options, or are you sort of boxing yourself into one decision? And then, like if you can afford it, like should you hire a guide? We That's our job. That's why we chose a career in this. It wasn't for the money, it was for sharing an experience, sharing knowledge, and spreading the stoke of the mountain endeavor. Questions?
Yeah, buddy. We've got a few here. Cody, man, thanks so much. That was awesome. We really do appreciate it. Anyone else, if you got some more questions, keep them coming in. We'll do another 5 minutes. We're right at an hour and a half though, which is our cutoff time. But we've got, one from Braxton here that says, explain the science of why skiing in the trees lowers avalanche probability.
Yeah. So that's a really great question. So just remember with trees, man, is that like if you're skiing in the trees and you're in avalanche terrain, if you can ski through trees comfortably, so can avalanches. So trees can trick even the most seasoned of professional. What I mean by that is that trees make us feel secure. They make us feel protected. They're this canopy over us. But if you're skiing in avalanche terrain, you're dealing with persistent weak layers, or any avalanche for that matter, and you're in avalanche terrain, and you can link up turns through them comfortably, so can avalanches. So people get tricked because trees also act as anchors, but they only anchor the slope in place if the trees are so thick that you can't ski through them comfortably. So don't get tricked in the trees, right? They have tricked the most seasoned of professionals, but they only act as anchors if they're so thick that you can't move through them comfortably.
Yep. Perfect. Do phones and inReach devices interfere with your beacon regarding using phone apps while you're touring?
They do. That's why you want to, if you're in search mode, you want to keep your beacon like 3 feet away from your from your phone.
Yep.
So it only interferes in search mode. So 2 to 3 feet away.
Perfect. Do you use apps like Theodolite to, I hope I'm pronouncing that somewhere near correctly.
Yeah, you know that.
Theodolite to help measure elevation and slope angle along with your inclinometer?
I do. I love Theodolite. Love it. Yeah, it's such a great app. And I'm very thankful that I paid the 10, 15 bucks or whatever it was for that app. I like that app a lot.
Perfect. Follow-up question. Do transceivers magnetic fields interfere with compass readings?
They do not, as far as I know.
Will you type in those links that you mentioned for weather and all that good stuff in there in the chat as well, please?
Yep. So the first one is the weather, and the second one is the link for the Baldy weather stations.
Killer. And then we had one more. It says, please comment on the following statements from the Wilson Glade accident. They are: a former forecaster, Evelyn Less, found that 32% of avalanche fatalities of tourers from 2009 to 2017 happened on the ascent. plus locked toe pieces keep skis attached to your feet and can contribute to a deeper burial. Now, I know that a lot of binding manufacturers, especially ski binding manufacturers, are working towards having a couple different settings, so one that, on the way up, it's not totally locked. But yeah, do you have any comments on that?
Yeah, so that was a really awful deal with the Wilson Glades. Is that's what contributed to their deeper burials, is their toes were locked. And since we are a snowboard brand here at Weston, getting caught in a big avalanche on a snowboard is a scary deal because it's really hard to come out of our bindings. In those locked skis or snowboards, they act as anchors and they can pull us deeper underneath the snow. So yeah, 32%. I think I said 40% in the beginning. So 32% happen on the uphill. But the problem is that you have to lock your toes on the uphill, right? Even on a snowboard, I use the hard boot setup and you have to lock your toes going up, because otherwise when you do like a kick turn, you just come right out of your skis. So it's a crummy deal in that situation because everybody was on the uphill. So everybody that got taken out by that avalanche, even the ones that were down below and the ones from above, they were all locked into those skis.
Yep. I think that just,
Yeah,
solidifies the importance of knowing what terrain is above you. I know some of the worst avalanches we've had, out here were the same situation. Our buddies got buried on the way up, and it was just heartbreaking. And it's just, I think it's just, it really brings that home that you really need to know what you're touring under and what kind of avalanche terrain is above you. Are there groups above you? And just be as careful as humanly possible, especially with the snowpack that you guys are experiencing right now, right?
yeah, man. These persistent weak layers like Colorado has been dealing with this year and Utah has been dealing with this year. Those are the types of avalanches that can be triggered from a distance and above. And so it's really important to give those big slopes like a really, really wide berth, because it can trick even the most experienced of people.
Well, awesome. I think that about sums it up here, gang. Cody, let the people know, how to get a hold of you. How can they, book you as a guide? You want to give them your cell phone number, or you want to just have them reach out to you? Type it down there in the chat there. The website there at UMA would probably be a great resource. But yeah, just let us know, how to reach out to you.
Yeah, so I work for Utah Mountain Adventures. You can find me on their website at utahmountainadventures.com here and on the World Wide Web there. And if you go to the registration link under there, I've just put my phone number in there. So if that's something, you can feel free to send me a text. And I am more than happy to answer questions from the talk if you have them, or help you, start your backcountry adventure. My email is also there. And then if you go to the website and you actually do just want to book, you just click on the registration link at the top, and underneath the notes section, you just request Cody Hughes as a guide. But, when you do that, make sure and reach out to me via email, or shoot me a text and we'll have a conversation. I love to tailor my tours toward people specific objectives. And so if that's you want to learn some avalanche education, you just want to go ski some terrain, whatever you want to learn in the mountains, I'm here to help. So, yeah, it'd be great to get out with any of you.
Well, thanks again, buddy. It's been a great presentation, man. You're always a delight to listen to speak, and just a delight as an educator. So just really, really stoked to connect you with the community here. Again, reach out to Cody, probably through the website, through his emails, the best course there. And then, yeah, tune in next week if you're wanting to hear about our Colorado snowpack. I think you'll hear a lot of very similar things. So again, thanks so much, Cody. We appreciate it, and we will see you all next time. Definitely tune in and check out all the previous episodes of the Slay at Home episode. If anyone's looking for a new snowboard as well, you can use the code Slay at Home on our website for 30% off a solid snowboard. Thanks for sticking it out to the end here. We appreciate you guys.
Rock on, everybody. Thank you so much.
Yeah, buddy. We'll
have
see
a great
you
evening.
Track.
Ben, are we staying on or are we good?
We're good, buddy. We'll see you.
All right. Thanks, Ben. See you.